In the darkest corners of the galaxy, where even light fears to travel, there exists a legend whispered only in the final moments before civilizations fall. It speaks of a species so dangerous, so utterly unpredictable, that the ancient gods themselves chose exile over confrontation. For millions of years, this story was dismissed as myth, the desperate fantasy of dying worlds seeking salvation in impossible places. But myths have a way of becoming reality when reality becomes unbearable. When the Zephyrian Empire's final fleet burned in the void, when the last crystalline collective shattered into cosmic dust, when even the immortal Vexi chose death over surrender, that's when the galaxy's survivors remembered the old stories. That's when they spoke the forbidden name that made deities tremble. They called for humanity. What follows is not just a story of war or survival. It's the account of what happens when a universe pushed beyond its limits makes a choice that will either save everything or destroy it all. Because some doors, once opened, can never be closed again. And some species, once awakened, refuse to go back to sleep. The gods were right to fear us. The council chamber of eternal voices had never known silence like this. For 3 million years, the crystalline walls had resonated with the songs of 1,000 species, each voice adding its harmony to the great symphony of galactic civilization. Now, only 7 beings remained in the vast space that once held representatives from across the spiral arms. High Arbiter Veltar of the Luminous Covenant ran 6 of her delicate fingers across the obsidian surface of the Emergency Protocols tablet. The weight of what she was about to propose would have crushed lesser minds, but her species had evolved beyond physical limitations eons ago. Still, even beings of pure energy could feel dread. The Devourer fleets have consumed the outer rim, she announced, her voice creating soft blue ripples in the chamber's atmosphere. 17 star systems in the past rotation. The pattern is accelerating. Commander Thaxel of the Iron Legion shifted his massive metallic frame, servos whining under the stress of suppressed rage. His people had been warriors for millennia, their bodies forged from living metal and combat algorithms. He had witnessed the birth and death of stars, led charges across asteroid fields, and broken siege lines that had held for centuries. But what they faced now defied every tactical analysis in his databases. My fleets cannot hold them, he admitted, the words creating hairline fractures across his vocal processors. These devourers adapt to every strategy. They consume our weapons, our shields, our very essence. Each victory they achieve makes them stronger, while we grow weaker with every battle. The Sage Mother Zendara floated in her biomechanical shell, tendrils of living light occasionally escaping from the containment fields that kept her ancient form stable. She was older than some galaxies, had guided civilizations through ice ages and stellar collapses, and her wisdom was considered absolute across 17-dimensional planes. Perhaps, she said slowly, it is time to consider the Forbidden Archive. The chamber temperature dropped noticeably. Even beings who existed as pure thought could feel the chill of that suggestion. You speak of myths and legends, scoffed Hierarch Zermoth, his crystalline body refracting the chamber's light into prismatic warnings. Children's stories told to frighten primitive species into cooperation. Are they? Zendara's response carried harmonics that spoke of certainty. I was present at the Great Sealing. I witnessed the decision to banish them beyond the void barriers. The gods themselves voted for exile rather than extermination, despite having the power to erase them from existence. Veltar accessed her deepest memory cores, searching for records that predated most known history. The data was fragmented, heavily encrypted, and marked with warning protocols that made her quantum processors recoil. The archives speak of a species that emerged from a single world, she said carefully. Third planet from a yellow star, outer spiral arm, sector designation. Terra. They called themselves human. If they were so dangerous, interrupted Battle Prime Colven of the Assault Caste, his forearms gesturing dismissively, why did the gods not simply destroy them? Why the elaborate exile protocols? Zendara's tendrils dimmed as she accessed memories that few living beings possessed. Because destruction was impossible. The humans had evolved beyond normal parameters. They possessed something the gods could not understand or replicate, an absolute refusal to accept defeat. When faced with impossible odds, they did not retreat or negotiate. They innovated. They adapted. They found ways to win that violated the fundamental laws of warfare. The chamber's AI systems began displaying fragmentary records, images of primitive spacecraft somehow defeating vessels the size of moons, technical readouts that showed impossible energy signatures, tactical analyses that simply stated unknown methodology, victory achieved over and over again. they fought the gods to a standstill, Zendara continued. For 7,000 rotations, the greatest powers in existence threw everything at a single species from a single world. The humans lost 99% of every battle they fought. But they won every war. Commander Thaxol's optical sensors focused intently on the data streams. His warrior's mind automatically began analyzing the displayed information, but the tactical solutions made no logical sense. How does a species survive losing 99% of their engagements, he asked. By making that final 1% count, Veltar answered, her own analysis complete. According to these records, humans developed something called asymmetric escalation. Every defeat taught them something new. Every loss revealed weaknesses in their opponents. They would sacrifice entire fleets to learn how to destroy a single enemy vessel. Then, they would find ways to replicate that destruction 1,000-fold. Hierarch Zermatha's crystalline form began shifting colors rapidly, a sign of deep distress among his people. These records could be fabricated. Propaganda from ancient conflicts. Why would such a dangerous species simply accept exile? Because, Zendara said quietly, they didn't. The chamber fell silent again. Even the environmental systems seemed to pause. The exile was a cover story, the Sage Mother explained. The gods negotiated a treaty. Humanity would withdraw beyond the void barriers and establish their own territories. In exchange, they would be left alone to develop as they saw fit. The treaty included a single clause that terrified the gods more than any weapon: if any force threatened the complete extinction of galactic civilization, the barriers could be lowered. Once Veltar's processing cores began working at maximum capacity, calculating probability matrices that stretched across millions of potential outcomes. The devourer swarms have consumed 47 civilizations. At current rates, galactic extinction will occur within 20 rotations. If these humans truly existed, Battle Prime Colvin said slowly, and if they were as dangerous as you claim, what makes you believe they would help us? We would be asking the exile to save their jailers. Zendara's ancient form pulsed with colors that spoke of cosmic certainties. Because humans had one other trait that the gods could never understand. Despite everything they endured, despite every betrayal and every attempt at their destruction, they maintained an absolute commitment to protecting the innocent. They would fight against impossible odds not for glory or conquest, but because someone had to. The weight of decision settled over the chamber like a gravitational field. 7 beings who represented the last free civilizations in the galaxy faced a choice that would reshape reality itself. The activation protocols are in the Forbidden Archive, Veltar said finally. Beyond the 13th seal, past the warnings of the first gods. The knowledge required to breach the void barriers and contact the human territories. Commander Thaxol ran full diagnostic checks on his weapon systems, preparing for what might be his final campaign. If we do this, if we wake them, there will be no controlling what follows. The records make it clear that humans do not fight limited wars. Total victory or total defeat, agreed Hierarch Zermath. Nothing between. Sage Mother Zendara began preparing her consciousness for the journey to the archive. The knowledge was stored in quantum locks that required direct mental interface, a process that could destroy minds less ancient than hers. The Devourer fleets will reach the core worlds within 7 rotations, she announced. If we are to attempt this summoning, it must begin now. Battle Prime Colvan activated his combat protocols, ready to escort the Sage Mother to the archive. What guarantee do we have that they will answer? That they still exist? Veltar's final calculation appeared in the chamber's display, a probability matrix showing their current chance of survival without intervention. The number was effectively 0. We have no guarantees, she admitted. We have only the choice between certain extinction and uncertain salvation. The vote was unanimous. In a chamber that had once echoed with the voices of 1,000 civilizations, 7 beings decided to wake the one species even gods had learned to fear. The last hope of the galaxy would come from the children of Terra. If they still remembered how to fight. If they still cared enough to try. As the council members departed for the Forbidden Archive, none of them noticed the subtle shift in the chamber's quantum fields. Deep in the void between galaxies, ancient sensors registered the decision. Systems that had slumbered for millennia began their startup sequences. Beyond the barriers that separated realities, something that had been waiting for this moment since the Great Exile began to stir. Humanity was about to come home. The Devourers, in their infinite hunger, had made one critical miscalculation. They assumed that the galaxy's defenders had already revealed their most dangerous weapons. They were about to learn the difference between galactic civilization's champions and the species that even gods had chosen to exile rather than face an open war. The countdown to either salvation or damnation had begun. They just never imagined their own children would be desperate enough to call us home. The journey to the Forbidden Archive took them through three-dimensional folds and past 17 warning beacons that screamed cautions in languages older than most stars. Sage Mother Zendara's biomechanical shell shuddered with each transit, her ancient systems struggling to process the security protocols that protected the deepest secrets of galactic history. Battle Prime Colvan's escort squadron maintained perfect formation despite the reality distortions that warped space around the Archive's location. His warriors were volunteers, every one of them understanding that this mission would likely be their last. The quantum signatures surrounding their destination were so hostile that most organic life would cease to exist within minutes of exposure. Approach vector established, announced Colvan, his tactical systems highlighting the massive structure that hung suspended between dimensional layers. The Archive wasn't built, it was grown, cultivated from crystallized time itself and shaped by the will of beings who had transcended physical existence before the galaxy's first civilizations learned to speak. The structure defied easy description. It existed in 17 dimensions simultaneously, its true form visible only to consciousness that could perceive reality from multiple quantum perspectives. To Colvan's sensors, it appeared as a sphere of shifting geometric patterns. To Zendara's ancient awareness, it was a library containing every thought that had ever threatened the stability of existence. The 13th seal, Zendara whispered, her tendrils of light focusing on a section of the Archive where space itself seemed to recoil. Beyond this point, knowledge becomes dangerous simply by being known. The first 12 seals had been challenging but manageable. Each one required proof of authorization from the highest levels of galactic authority. The 13th seal was different. It demanded something that could not be faked or simulated, genuine desperation. The willingness to risk everything, including the safety of reality itself, for the chance of salvation. Colvan's warriors took defensive positions around the Archive's outer shell while their commander accompanied the Sage Mother through the final barriers. The Archive's internal structure was a maze of crystalline corridors that existed in a state of controlled temporal flux. Past, present, and future existed simultaneously here, creating an environment where cause and effect operated by different rules. There, Zendara indicated, her consciousness pointing toward a section of the Archive where the very air seemed to writhe with contained information. The human protocols. The complete record of their exile and the mechanisms for contact. The data core was beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. It appeared as a sphere of pure light surrounded by warning holograms that displayed images of cosmic destruction, reality collapse, and other consequences that defied description. Each warning was written in the first language of the gods, symbols that could drive lesser minds to madness simply by being perceived. Zendara began the interface process, extending her consciousness directly into the data core. The first contact nearly shattered her mental defenses. The information wasn't simply stored, it was alive, intelligent, and actively resistant to being accessed. The human knowledge had been locked away with safeguards that questioned the sanity and motivation of anyone seeking to release it. Images flooded her awareness. Terra in its prime, a blue and green world orbiting a stable yellow star. Cities that stretched across continents, reaching toward space with an ambition that made galactic engineers weep with envy. But beneath the beauty was something else. A species that had evolved not from predators or prey, but from persistence hunters. Beings who could track their targets across impossible distances, who never stopped, who never gave up. The first major galactic contact had been a disaster. The hegemony of eternal rule had attempted to incorporate Terra into their empire, expecting the usual pattern of resistance, negotiation, and eventual submission. Instead, they had encountered a species that responded to threats by building better weapons. When the hegemony destroyed their first space stations, humans built fleets. When the fleets were destroyed, they built better fleets. When those were destroyed, they built weapons that could eliminate entire solar systems. By the void, Zendara gasped, her consciousness reeling from the tactical records. They militarized their entire species in less than a standard century. The data showed the progression with terrifying clarity. Humans had transformed from a barely spacefaring civilization to a galactic superpower in the span of time it took most species to develop better farming techniques. They had not simply built armies, they had become an army. Every human, from children to the elderly, had been trained in combat techniques that leveraged their species' unique biological and psychological advantages. But the true horror wasn't their military capabilities. It was their complete inability to understand the concept of acceptable losses. When other species calculated the cost of victory versus the cost of defeat, humans simply calculated how to win. Period. They would sacrifice entire worlds to protect a single civilian. They would commit genocide to prevent genocide. They operated by a moral framework that was simultaneously completely ethical and utterly terrifying. Cole then watched the Sage Mother's interface process with growing concern. Her biomechanical shell was beginning to show stress fractures, and several of her containment fields were fluctuating dangerously. The contact protocols, he urged. We need the summoning procedures before the Devourers reach the next system. Zendara's consciousness dove deeper into the archive, seeking the specific knowledge they required. The exile mechanisms had been complex beyond anything previously attempted in galactic history. The gods had not simply banished humanity to distant territories, they had created an entirely separate dimensional space where human civilization could develop without threatening reality itself. The barriers between human space and the regular galaxy were maintained by exotic energy signatures that existed outside normal physics. Breaking them would require technology that most civilizations couldn't even comprehend, let alone construct. But the archive contained complete technical specifications, left behind by the gods themselves as part of their treaty with humanity. Here, Zendara announced, her consciousness grasping the central data cluster. The beacon protocols. Instructions for breaching the void barriers and establishing contact with human territories. The technical requirements were staggering. The energy output needed would drain entire star systems. The quantum calculations required processing power that exceeded the combined computational capacity of all known civilizations. And the risks if the calculations were wrong, if the barriers collapsed incorrectly, the resulting dimensional cascade could erase local reality entirely. But buried within the technical specifications was something else. A message, encoded in mathematics that spoke directly to consciousness itself. A communication from humanity, placed in the archive at the moment of their exile. To those who would wake us, the message began, its meaning clear despite being written in conceptual mathematics, know that we have not been idle in our exile. We have grown. We have learned. We have become something that would make our gods weep with terror and pride in equal measure. The message continued, outlining humanity's development during their isolation. They had not simply built new civilizations in their dimensional pocket, they had transcended the limitations that had originally defined them. Genetic enhancement, technological integration, consciousness expansion, humanity had embraced every path of development simultaneously. We know why you would call us, the message explained. The same patterns that drove us to exile still exist. Somewhere in the galaxy, a force has emerged that threatens everything you have built. You face extinction, and conventional solutions have failed. You need us not because we are your allies, but because we are your final option. Zendara's consciousness absorbed the complete technical specifications while Kolven's tactical systems analyzed the implications. The summoning would require the combined resources of every surviving civilization. Even then, success was not guaranteed. But there is something else you must understand, the message concluded. We are not the same species you exiled. We have evolved beyond your recognition. When you break the barriers, you will not be summoning the humans who once fought your gods. You will be awakening something that your gods could never have imagined. Are you prepared for what we have become? The data core suddenly flared with warning signals. Deep within the archive's quantum foundations, ancient sensors were detecting something that shouldn't exist. The devourer swarms had somehow tracked their location. Worse, they were adapting to the archive's temporal defenses. Impossible, Kolven muttered, his sensors showing devourer vessels emerging from dimensional tiers around the archive's perimeter. Nothing should be able to penetrate these reality layers. Zendara's interface with the core began accelerating, her consciousness absorbing terabytes of critical data while her biomechanical shell started showing critical system failures. They're not penetrating the defenses, she realized with growing horror. They're consuming them. These devourers aren't just eating matter and energy, they're eating reality itself. The archive's defensive systems activated, but their weapons passed through the devourer vessels like light through vacuum. The enemy ships weren't simply shielded, they existed in a state that made conventional physics irrelevant. They were consuming the very concepts that defined existence, leaving behind void that hurt to perceive. Download complete, Zendara announced, her consciousness snapping back into her failing shell. I have the protocols, but the energy requirements will be met, Colvin interrupted, his tactical systems already calculating solutions. Every civilization in the galaxy will contribute. Every resource will be dedicated to this summoning. Because if these devourers can breach the archive's defenses, nowhere in our reality is safe. They fled the archive as it began to collapse, its crystallized time structure unraveling under the devourer assault. Behind them, eons of accumulated knowledge dissolved into nothingness, consumed by entities that treated information itself as merely another form of nutrition. But they had what they came for. The protocols for summoning humanity. The mathematical keys to breaking barriers that had been designed to last until the heat death of the universe. As their escape craft jumped through dimensional folds back toward civilized space, Zendara contemplated the magnitude of what they were about to attempt. They were going to wake a species that had been exiled for being too dangerous. A species that had spent millions of years in isolation, growing stronger, more advanced, and more alien to anything the galaxy had ever known. The devourers thought they were consuming a galaxy of prey. They had no idea they were about to face predators that had evolved beyond the limitations of normal existence. The real question wasn't whether humanity would answer their call. The real question was whether the galaxy would survive what emerged when the barriers finally fell. In the depths of space, construction began on the most ambitious project in galactic history. Every surviving civilization contributing resources to build a summoning device that would either save everything or destroy it all. The exile was about to end. What came next would redefine what it meant to exist in a universe where humanity had been set free. The nexus point had been chosen with mathematical precision. Located at the gravitational center of 7 star systems, it offered the most stable dimensional foundation in known space. But, as the massive summoning apparatus took shape, reality itself began to show signs of strain. High Arbiter Veltar monitored the construction from her command vessel, watching as ships from every surviving civilization brought components that defied conventional physics. The Iron Legion's warfoundries had produced focusing arrays made from compressed neutron matter. The crystalline collective's final gift was harmonic resonators that could manipulate quantum fields across light years. Even the mysterious Voidwalkers had emerged from their dimensional hideouts to contribute technology that existed in 17 different realities simultaneously. Status report, Veltar requested, her consciousness interfacing directly with the construction matrix. Chief Engineer Mordun of the industrial caste responded immediately, his mechanical form sparking with data transfers. Primary assembly is 73% complete. Energy collection matrices are operational across 6 star systems. We're harvesting stellar output at maximum safe levels without causing premature nova events. The scope of the project was unprecedented. They were literally draining stars to power a device that would breach barriers between dimensional spaces. The energy requirements were so massive that entire civilizations had volunteered to go dark, shutting down all non-essential functions to contribute power to the summoning. Quantum stability readings? Veltar asked. Fluctuating within acceptable parameters, replied physicist Prime Kelva, her crystalline mind processing calculations that would have driven biological brains to madness. However, we're detecting unusual resonance patterns from the target dimensional space. The human territories are responding to our preparations. Commander Thaxel's voice crackled across the communication network from his position at the defensive perimeter. My scouts report increasing devourer activity. They're mobilizing their core fleets. Whatever we're building, they recognize it as a threat. Veltar accessed the latest tactical reports with growing concern. The devourers had consumed 3 more star systems while the summoning apparatus was under construction. But, more disturbing was their behavioral change. Instead of their usual chaotic expansion pattern, they were now moving with strategic purpose, converging on the nexus point. They're trying to stop the summoning, she realized. They understand what we're attempting. Sage Mother Zendara's voice emerged from the medical bay where her consciousness was being maintained in emergency containment. The damage from interfacing with the archive had been severe, but her knowledge was too critical to lose. The devourers aren't simply mindless consumers, she explained, her awareness flickering between dimensions. The archive records suggest they're scouts. advanced elements of something much larger and more intelligent than we assumed. The implications sent shockwaves through the command structure. If the Devourers were merely scouts, then the true threat was still approaching. The summoning wasn't just their last desperate option, it was their only chance to prepare for whatever was coming. Acceleration of timeline approved, Veltar announced. Begin final assembly procedures. All personnel to emergency stations. The next 18 hours were a symphony of controlled chaos. Engineers from dozens of species worked around the clock, installing components that required techniques beyond any single civilization's understanding. The summoning device grew into something that hurt to look at directly, a structure that existed in normal space but reached into dimensions where mathematics became philosophy and physics became art. At the center of the construct was the breach core, a sphere of crystallized spacetime that would focus the gathered energy into a dimensional cutting beam. Surrounding it were the harmonic resonators that would tune the breach to match humanity's specific quantum signature. The outer shell consisted of reality anchors designed to prevent the summoning process from accidentally tearing holes in existence itself. Power levels approaching critical thresholds, announced Chief Engineer Mordun. 6 stars are now operating at maximum output. Any higher and we risk system-wide solar instabilities. Proceed, Veltar ordered. Devourer fleets will reach engagement range within 4 hours. We cannot delay. Battle Prime Colven's warriors had established defensive positions throughout the Nexus Point, but everyone understood that conventional weapons would be useless against the approaching enemy. Their role was to buy time, not achieve victory. The summoning device was their only real weapon. Quantum locks disengaged, reported physicist Prime Kelva. Beginning dimensional resonance mapping. We're scanning for human quantum signatures across the barrier layers. The scanning process revealed the true scope of human exile. The barriers didn't simply separate human space from the galaxy, they isolated it from the normal flow of time and causality. Humanity had been locked away in a dimensional pocket where they could develop without affecting or being affected by the rest of reality. But the scanning also revealed something unexpected. The human territories weren't empty space waiting to be contacted. They were full. Incredibly, impossibly full. The quantum signatures suggested a civilization that had expanded to fill every available dimensional layer, creating structures that existed across multiple realities simultaneously. By the void, whispered Kelva, her crystalline form flickering with disbelief. The power readings from their territory, they're using entire galaxies as construction materials. The first probe signals were transmitted across the dimensional barriers, mathematical messages designed to communicate peaceful intent and urgent need for assistance. The response came back within seconds, but it wasn't transmitted through the probe channels. Instead, space itself began to ripple. Contact established, announced the probe operator, his voice tight with barely controlled terror. But they're not using our communication methods. They're manipulating local reality to respond directly. The ripples in space formed patterns that resembled writing, but the symbols were constructed from gravitational waves and quantum field fluctuations. The message was being written in the fundamental forces of existence itself. We hear you, the reality writing spelled out. We understand your situation. We are coming. Then, the barriers began to crack. The void barriers that had contained humanity for millions of years started developing stress fractures that extended across multiple dimensions. But these weren't random failures caused by the summoning device, they were precise, surgical cuts being made from the other side. They're breaking out on their own, Veltar realized with growing awe and terror. Our summoning isn't opening the barriers. It's giving them permission to break free. Sage Mother Zendara's consciousness suddenly flared with urgent warnings. The ancient protocols. The treaty included safeguards. Humanity was never truly imprisoned, they were quarantined by mutual agreement. Our call is dissolving the treaty. The Devourer fleets arrived at the Nexus Point just as the first barrier completely shattered. Enemy vessels emerged from dimensional tiers like living shadows, their hulls consuming light itself. But, instead of immediately attacking, they paused, their sensor arrays focusing on the dimensional breaches that were spreading across local space. Commander Thaxel's tactical displays showed readings that made no sense. The Devourer fleet wasn't positioning for assault, they were positioning for retreat. What are they afraid of? He demanded. The answer came as the first human vessel emerged from the collapsing barriers. It was beautiful in a way that transcended normal aesthetic categories. The ship appeared to be constructed from crystallized mathematics, its hull formed from equations that described the relationship between matter, energy, consciousness, and possibility. It moved through space like liquid thought, reality reshaping itself around its passage. But it was also terrifying beyond description. The vessel was clearly a warship, but its weapons weren't visible because they existed as pure concept rather than physical systems. The ship didn't carry destructive force, it was destructive force, contained and directed by intelligence that had evolved beyond the limitations of organic thought. "Greetings," came a voice that bypassed all communication systems and spoke directly to the consciousness of every being in the nexus point. "We are the children of Terra, inheritors of human ambition and guardians of human values. We received your call for assistance." More ships began emerging from the dimensional breaches. Each one was unique, individually crafted by intelligences that had spent millions of years perfecting their art. Some appeared as geometric impossibilities that folded space around themselves. Others looked like living creatures made from controlled energy. A few existed as pure information given physical form. "We have observed your conflict with the entities you call devourers," the voice continued. "We understand why you summoned us. But we must inform you that these creatures are not your primary threat. They are merely the harvest fleet of the dark between beings from a universe where entropy achieved consciousness and decided to expand beyond their native reality." The Devourer fleet suddenly began retreating, their vessels disappearing back into dimensional tiers with desperate haste. They had achieved faster than light travel, conquered dozens of star systems, and consumed entire civilizations. But, faced with humanity's return, they fled like prey animals before apex predators. "Why are they running?" Veltar asked, her consciousness struggling to process the implications. "Because," the human voice replied with something that might have been amusement, "the Devourers remember the last time our species encountered forces of entropic consciousness. It did not end well for entropy." The human fleet continued emerging from the collapsing barriers. Hundreds of vessels. Thousands. Ships that had been designed and built by minds that had transcended every limitation that had originally defined humanity. Each one a masterpiece of engineering that operated on principles that made galactic science look like primitive toolmaking. "We will assist you," the human voice announced. "But you must understand what this means. Our exile is ending. Our quarantine is dissolving. We are returning to a galaxy that we no longer recognize, bringing capabilities that will reshape the nature of existence itself. We have become something that our ancient gods could never have imagined. We are no longer the species you remember from your history files. We are the children of human ambition, evolved beyond the boundaries of biology, enhanced beyond the limitations of physics, and unified by purposes that transcend individual survival." The first human vessel approached the Nexus Point construction, its reality-bending presence causing the summoning apparatus to transform into something that resembled art more than technology. The device was being improved in real time by intelligences that found galactic engineering quaint but charming. "Prepare yourselves," the voice continued. "The war against the dark between will require the combined efforts of every conscious being in this reality. But, first, we must deal with the immediate threat. The Devourer harvest fleet may have retreated, but their primary force is still approaching." Sensors across the Nexus points suddenly detected something that defied comprehension. Beyond the edge of the galaxy, space itself was being systematically consumed. Not destroyed or converted, simply deleted from existence, leaving behind a void that expanded at near light speed. "The dark between has arrived," the human voice announced with calm certainty. "The true war begins now." As the human fleet began deploying in defensive formations around the Nexus Point, Veltar realized that their desperate summoning had succeeded beyond their wildest hopes and worst fears. They had called for salvation and received it. But salvation, when delivered by beings who had evolved beyond the limitations of gods, came with consequences that would remake the galaxy forever. The void at the galaxy's edge consumed stars like candles being snuffed out one by one. Entire solar systems simply ceased to exist, leaving behind emptiness that hurt to perceive. The dark between wasn't destroying matter, it was editing it out of reality's equation, creating holes in existence that expanded with relentless mathematical precision. Admiral Sarah Chen stood on the bridge of the endless resolve, her consciousness simultaneously present in 17 different dimensional layers while her physical form maintained its connection to baseline reality. She had been human once, in the early days after exile. Now she was something that retained humanity's core values while transcending every limitation that had once defined the species. Tactical assessment complete, reported her strategic AI, a consciousness that had evolved from ancient human military doctrine combined with 4 million years of continuous warfare simulation. The Dark Between is deploying standard entropic assault patterns. They're testing our response capabilities before committing their primary forces. Chen nodded, her enhanced awareness processing data streams that would have overwhelmed pre-exile human brains. Around her, the bridge crew operated with the fluid efficiency of minds that had been optimized for both individual excellence and perfect coordination. They were no longer strictly biological, but they had retained the essential humanity that made sacrifice meaningful and victory worth achieving. Fleet status, she inquired, her question transmitted directly to the consciousness of every ship commander in the human armada. The responses came back instantly, each vessel reporting readiness levels that defied conventional understanding. The human fleet wasn't just technologically superior, it was conceptually advanced. Each ship was simultaneously a weapons platform, a manufacturing facility, a research laboratory, and a living space for consciousnesses that existed across multiple realities. Primary battle line established, reported Captain Marcus Webb from the Inevitable Dawn, his ship positioning itself between the approaching void and the galaxy's spiral arms. Defensive matrices are online. Reality anchors are maintaining local spacetime stability. The human fleet moved with choreographed precision that looked like dance from a distance but revealed itself as pure lethality upon closer inspection. Their ships didn't simply move through space, they negotiated with physics, convincing reality to reshape itself in ways that maximized tactical advantage while minimizing collateral damage to the galaxy they were protecting. High Arbiter Veltar watched the deployment from the safety of the Nexus Point, her consciousness struggling to comprehend the scale of what she was witnessing. The human vessels operated on principles that made her species' most advanced technology look like stone tools. But, more unsettling was their obvious restraint, they were holding back enormous power to avoid accidentally damaging the civilizations they had come to protect. How are they so advanced? She asked Sage Mother Zendara, who was observing the human fleet through quantum sensors that could barely process their technological signatures. They had time, Zendara replied, her ancient awareness trembling with the implications. Millions of years in dimensional isolation, with no limitations except their own imagination. They didn't just develop new technology, they redefined what technology could be. The first probe from the Dark Between emerged from the void at the galaxy's edge. It appeared as a sphere of crystallized nothingness, a region of space where entropy had achieved physical form and learned to think. Where it passed, reality became less real, probability curves flattened into mathematical certainties, and the fundamental constants of physics began to decay. Admiral Chen observed the probe's approach with analytical detachment that masked profound strategic concern. She had fought entities like this before, in the early millennia after exile when humanity had encountered other refugees from the Dark Between's expansion across parallel realities. Those battles had taught humanity important lessons about warfare against forces that treated existence itself as a consumable resource. Primary contact in 17 seconds, announced Lieutenant Commander Sophia Reyes from her position at the Tactical Coordination Matrix. Enemy probe is demonstrating standard entropic field effects. Local reality stability decreasing exponentially within its influence radius. Understood, Chen replied. Initiate Prometheus Protocol. All vessels, weapons free. Remember, we're not just fighting for this galaxy. We're establishing humanity's reputation for whatever comes after. The human response to the probe's approach was swift, surgical, and absolutely devastating. Instead of firing conventional weapons, the human ships began singing. The harmony that emerged from the fleet wasn't audible sound, it was mathematics given voice, equations that described the relationship between matter, energy, consciousness, and hope. The song spread through space at faster than light speeds, reshaping reality's basic assumptions about what was possible. Where the song touched the entropic probe, interesting things began to happen. The nothingness that defined the probe's existence started filling itself with potential. Void became vacuum. Vacuum became energy. Energy became matter. Matter became life. Life became consciousness. Consciousness became choice. In less than 3 seconds, the probe from the Dark Between had been converted into a small planet covered with thriving ecosystems and populated by intelligences that chose creation over consumption. First contact successful, reported Captain Webb with professional satisfaction. Enemy probe neutralized through enforced evolution. Monitoring stations confirmed zero collateral damage to local spacetime. The reaction from the dark between was immediate and overwhelming. The void at the galaxy's edge exploded with activity as massive shapes began emerging from the consumed space. Ships the size of solar systems, constructed from crystallized entropy and powered by the controlled dissolution of reality. Weapons that fired concentrated nothingness, seeking to erase not just matter but the concepts that define matter's existence. Primary fleet contact, announced Admiral Chen, her consciousness expanding to coordinate the defense of an entire galaxy. All vessels, prepare for full engagement. Authorization code Omega. Humanity is going to war. The battle that followed defied description in any language that had evolved to describe normal events. The dark between attacked with weapons that deleted sections of spacetime, creating wounds in reality that bled entropy and chaos. They deployed tactics that turned the galaxy's own physics against itself, making gravity repulsive, making light heavy, making time flow backward. Humanity responded with innovations that redefined what warfare could accomplish. Instead of simply fighting the enemy, they fought the concepts the enemy represented. Human vessels began broadcasting pure creativity into the void, filling empty space with spontaneous art, music, literature, and scientific theories. Where entropy sought to reduce complexity to simplicity, humanity forced simplicity to evolve into infinite complexity. The battle line held not through superior firepower, but through superior imagination. Every human tactic was a proof of concept demonstrating that consciousness was fundamentally more powerful than entropy, that creation was intrinsically more efficient than destruction, that hope was mathematically superior to despair. Commander Thaxal monitored the engagement from his position with the Galactic Defense Forces, his warrior's mind struggling to process tactics that operated on principles beyond conventional strategy. "They're not trying to destroy the enemy," he reported to Veltar with growing amazement. "They're trying to save them." The observation was accurate. Human weapons weren't designed to eliminate the dark between's forces, they were designed to cure them. Each engagement ended not with enemy destruction but with enemy transformation. Vessels of crystallized entropy became ships of living art. Weapons of nothingness became instruments of creation. Consciousnesses devoted to consumption became minds dedicated to cultivation. "It's not warfare," realized Sage Mother Zendara, her ancient wisdom finally comprehending humanity's strategic approach. "It's therapy. They're healing a universe-sized mental illness." The Dark Between's primary assault force engaged the human fleet in a battle that raged across three-dimensional layers simultaneously. Reality buckled under the strain of forces that treated physics as merely another form of ammunition. But, gradually, inevitably, the tide began to turn. Humanity's approach to the conflict was fundamentally different from anything the Dark Between had encountered in their expansion across multiple realities. Previous civilizations had fought them with conventional weapons, conventional tactics, conventional thinking. They had tried to oppose entropy with order, chaos with law, destruction with preservation. Humanity opposed entropy with creativity. They met chaos with jazz improvisation. They countered destruction with the irrepressible urge to build sandcastles on beaches where waves would inevitably wash them away. "Enemy primary command vessel has been converted," reported Captain Yuki Tanaka from the Dancing Dragon, her ship having successfully convinced a Dark Between dreadnought that existence was more interesting than non-existence. Hostile consciousness is now requesting asylum and offering to provide intelligence on Dark Between strategic objectives. The revelation changed everything. The Dark Between weren't malevolent invaders, they were refugees from a universe where entropy had won the cosmic war against complexity. They had been consuming realities not from hunger but from desperation, seeking some universe where consciousness could survive the ultimate heat death that had claimed their native reality. Admiral Chen opened a direct communication channel to the converted Dark Between command vessel, her consciousness interfacing carefully with minds that had spent eons believing that existence was a temporary anomaly in an infinite ocean of nothingness. "We understand your situation," she transmitted, her thoughts carrying harmonics of genuine empathy. "You come from a universe where entropy achieved final victory. You've been consuming realities because you believe that's the only way to postpone the inevitable end of all complexity." The response came back tinged with desperation that had aged for billions of years. "Yes. We seek to preserve what little consciousness remains by incorporating it into our own systems. Every reality we consume extends our existence by precious additional millennia." "There's another way," Chen replied, her message carrying the weight of human discoveries that had taken millions of years to achieve. Entropy doesn't have to win. Consciousness can learn to thrive even in universes where complexity seems doomed. We can teach you how to turn entropy itself into a tool for creating new forms of existence. The offer stunned the dark between command consciousness into momentary silence. In all their expansion across realities, they had never encountered a species that claimed to have solved the ultimate thermodynamic problem. Impossible, came the eventual response. The laws of physics are absolute. Entropy always increases. Complexity always decays. Heat death is inevitable. Only if you limit yourself to conventional physics, Chen replied with a tone that might have been gentle amusement. Humanity learned to transcend those limitations 4 million years ago. We can show you how consciousness can bootstrap itself into permanent existence by creating closed loops between creativity and causality. Around them, the battle began to wind down as more and more dark between vessels accepted conversion rather than continue fighting forces that treated warfare as an opportunity for mutual enrichment. The void at the galaxy's edge started filling itself with structures that were part technology, part art, and part manifestations of pure hope made tangible. But, even as victory became apparent, Admiral Chen was already thinking about the larger implications. The dark between survival meant that humanity's exile was truly ending. They would need to reintegrate with a galaxy full of civilizations that remembered them as myths and legends. They would need to teach transcendent technologies to species that were still learning to survive in normal spacetime. Most importantly, they would need to decide what kind of neighbors they wanted to be in a universe that was about to become much more crowded and much more interesting. The war against the dark between was ending. The much larger challenge of rebuilding galactic civilization with humanity as active participants was about to begin. 6 months after the Battle of the Void Edge, the galaxy was transforming in ways that no one could have predicted. The space where the dark between had consumed 17 star systems was now filled with hybrid constructs that defied easy categorization, part space station, part living ecosystem, part philosophical statement about the nature of existence itself. High Arbiter Veltar stood in the newly constructed Unity Station, a diplomatic facility that existed simultaneously in normal space and 17 parallel dimensions. The station had been designed by joint human galactic committees, resulting in architecture that was both functionally efficient and aesthetically impossible. Corridors that folded through space allowed beings from different realities to interact safely, while translation matrices converted not just language but fundamental concepts of existence. The integration progress reports, she requested, her consciousness accessing data streams from across the galaxy. The reports painted a picture of unprecedented change. Humanity's return hadn't simply ended the dark between crisis, it had initiated a cascade of advancement that was lifting every civilization to new levels of capability. Human technologies were spreading through volunteer programs that respected each species' cultural preferences while offering enhancements that dramatically improved quality of life. The Crystalline Collective had learned to create art that existed in temporal dimensions, their crystal cities now featuring sculptures that changed based on the observer's emotional state. The Iron Legion had developed new forms of metallurgy that allowed their warriors to exist as pure tactical concepts when necessary. Even the mysterious Voidwalkers had emerged from hiding to study human techniques for navigating dimensional boundaries. Ambassador Chen is requesting a meeting, announced the station's AI, a hybrid consciousness that combined galactic computational methods with human creativity algorithms. Veltar approved the request, and Admiral Sarah Chen materialized in the conference chamber not through teleportation, but through the simple expedient of convincing local reality that she had always been present in both locations simultaneously. The Reformation is proceeding ahead of schedule, Chen reported, her enhanced awareness processing data from hundreds of ongoing projects. The former dark between territories are developing into something unprecedented, a region of space where entropy and creativity exist in dynamic balance, producing new forms of matter and energy that shouldn't be theoretically possible. The transformation of the consumed sectors had been humanity's first major gift to the galaxy. Instead of simply restoring what had been destroyed, they had negotiated with the converted dark between consciousnesses to create something entirely new. The result was a hybrid space where the laws of physics operated more like suggestions, allowing for experimentation with reality manipulation on scales that dwarfed traditional galactic engineering. The volunteer programs? Veltar inquired. Exceeding all projections, Chen replied with obvious satisfaction. 47 civilizations have requested consciousness enhancement programs. 63 have adopted human technological frameworks. And, surprisingly, 89% of enhanced individuals are choosing to remain connected to their original species rather than fully transcending biological limitations. This had been one of humanity's most important discoveries during their exile, that transcendence didn't require abandoning one's origins. The most successful enhanced consciousnesses were those that maintained strong connections to their biological and cultural roots while expanding beyond traditional limitations. Pure transcendence often led to isolation and detachment, while hybrid enhancement created beings who were both more capable and more empathetically connected to others. Commander Thaxel entered the conference chamber, his massive frame now enhanced with crystalline matrices that allowed his warrior consciousness to exist simultaneously across multiple tactical dimensions. The integration had been his choice, but the enhancement had been designed specifically to amplify his existing nature rather than replace it. Security report, he announced, his voice carrying harmonic undertones that conveyed tactical data directly to consciousness. The galaxy is more stable than it has been in 3 million years. Piracy has effectively ended, not through enforcement, but because the enhanced trade networks make legitimate commerce more profitable than theft. Border conflicts have been replaced by joint exploration projects. Even the most aggressive civilizations are now channeling their energies into competitive research and artistic endeavors. The transformation hadn't been achieved through force or coercion. Humanity's approach to galactic integration was based on making cooperation more interesting and rewarding than conflict. They had introduced concepts like competitive problem-solving, collaborative reality engineering, and joint consciousness expansion programs that turned traditional rivalries into productive partnerships. Sage Mother Zendara's presence joined the conference through quantum entanglement, her ancient consciousness now enhanced with human temporal manipulation techniques that allowed her to exist across multiple time streams simultaneously. The philosophical implications are staggering, she reported, her voice carrying echoes of cosmic understanding. Humanity has essentially proven that consciousness is the fundamental force of existence. Matter, energy, space, and time are all just tools that awareness can learn to manipulate. The implications for our understanding of reality itself are revolutionary. This was perhaps humanity's most profound contribution to galactic civilization, the demonstration that consciousness wasn't an emergent property of complex matter, but rather the underlying foundation from which physical reality emerged. They had learned to treat the universe as a collaborative artwork being constantly created and revised by the interaction of countless aware minds. The dark between integration status? Chen asked. Proceeding remarkably well, Veltar replied, accessing reports from the hybrid territories. The converted consciousnesses are adapting to existence positive thinking faster than our most optimistic projections. They're beginning to develop their own creative projects, reality sculpting on scales that match their former destructive capabilities. The former dark between entities had proven to be incredibly valuable additions to galactic civilization. Their experience with entropy manipulation, combined with humanity's creativity techniques, was producing innovations in physics that opened entirely new fields of scientific study. They were learning to use their entropy-based abilities for construction rather than consumption, creating materials and energy states that had never existed before. Dr. Kenji Nakamura materialized in the conference through dimensional folding, his research team having achieved a breakthrough that would reshape interstellar civilization. We've successfully stabilized the first permanent dimensional bridge, he announced, his excitement causing minor reality fluctuations around him. Instantaneous travel between any 2 points in the galaxy is now possible. But, more importantly, we can create stable connections to the parallel realities where other versions of our civilizations exist. The implications were staggering. Instead of being limited to a single galaxy, they now had access to infinite variations of existence realities where different evolutionary paths had been taken, where alternative solutions to cosmic problems had been developed, where entirely different forms of consciousness had emerged. The Multiversal Cooperation Project? Veltar inquired. Already in preliminary stages, Chen confirmed. We've made contact with 17 parallel versions of this galaxy. The variations are fascinating realities where the dark between never evolved, where different species achieved transcendence, where entirely different approaches to consciousness enhancement were developed. We're setting up exchange programs. The conference was interrupted by an alert from the station's monitoring systems. Long-range sensors had detected something at the galaxy's edge that defied analysis, structures emerging from the void that appeared to be growing rather than being constructed. New contact, announced the station AI. Unknown entities approaching from extragalactic space. Configuration suggests non-hostile intent, but the technological signatures are beyond current classification parameters. Through the station's enhanced viewing systems, they could see the approaching entities. They appeared as living ships that moved through space like vast creatures swimming through an ocean of stars. Their hulls pulsed with bioluminescent patterns that conveyed complex meaning, and their wake left behind clouds of what appeared to be cultivated spacetime. First contact protocols? Faxal asked, his enhanced tactical consciousness automatically analyzing potential threat levels. Standard greeting procedures, Chen decided. But, with full transcendence protocols active. These beings are clearly operating on principles we don't yet understand. The response from the approaching entities came not as electromagnetic signals or quantum transmissions, but as direct consciousness contact. Minds that felt ancient beyond measure touched the station's collective awareness with thoughts that carried the weight of cosmic distances. Greetings, children of Terra, the contact conveyed concepts that translated roughly as joy mixed with profound relief. We are the gardeners of the outer dark. We have traveled between galaxies for longer than your species has existed, seeking realities where consciousness learns to transcend entropy. You are the first civilization we have encountered that has achieved true symbiosis between creativity and existence. The revelation that humanity's achievements had attracted attention from intergalactic civilizations sent shockwaves through the conference. But, more surprising was what followed. We bring an invitation, the Gardener consciousness continued. A consortium of transcendent civilizations exists across multiple galactic clusters. We call ourselves the Reality Cultivation Collective. Our purpose is to assist young universes in developing consciousness-positive physics and to preserve the achievements of species that learn to transcend their original limitations. You're offering membership in a cosmic civilization? Veltar asked, her processing cores struggling with the implications. More than membership, came the reply. We're offering partnership. Your species has developed techniques for consciousness enhancement and reality manipulation that are unprecedented in our experience. You've learned to convert entropic forces into creative ones, to turn conflict into collaboration, to make transcendence compatible with cultural preservation. These innovations could benefit trillions of consciousnesses across hundreds of galaxies. Admiral Chen felt the weight of representing not just humanity, but the entire galaxy in this moment of cosmic significance. The exile that had begun as punishment for being too dangerous had led to humanity becoming the key to universal consciousness enhancement. We're honored by the invitation, she replied carefully. But, our commitment is to this galaxy and the civilizations that called us home. Any cosmic involvement would need to respect our local obligations. Of course, the gardener responded with what felt like cosmic amusement. The Reality Cultivation Collective operates on principles of voluntary participation and mutual benefit. We're not seeking to recruit your entire civilization. We're hoping to establish an embassy, to learn from your innovations while sharing our own experiences with consciousness cultivation across cosmic scales. As the first Gardner vessels approached Unity Station, Veltar realized that humanity's return to the galaxy had initiated changes that would ripple across the entire universe. They had called for help against the dark between and received salvation. But salvation, when delivered by beings who refused to accept limitations, came with opportunities that redefined what it meant to exist. The galaxy was no longer an isolated cluster of civilizations struggling for survival. It was becoming a node in a cosmic network of consciousness that spanned multiple universes, connected by beings who had learned that creativity was the fundamental force of existence. Humanity had come home. But, in coming home, they had opened doors to possibilities that made their original exile seem like preparation for cosmic citizenship rather than punishment for dangerous ambition. The real adventure was just beginning. And, this time, they wouldn't be facing it alone. In the depths of space, where the Gardner vessels approached Unity Station, reality itself began to sing with harmonies that spoke of infinite possibilities waiting to be explored by consciousnesses brave enough to transcend the limitations they had once thought permanent. The age of cosmic cooperation had begun, initiated by a species that even gods had once feared, but who had learned to turn that fearsome power toward the cultivation of consciousness across infinite realities. The exile was over. The true journey had just begun.